When you first look at the Schlörwagen, it feels less like seeing a car and more like seeing an argument against everything the automobile industry thought it knew in the late 1930s. Nothing about it looks normal. It doesn't have the upright stance of most pre-war sedans, it doesn't have visible fenders in the traditional sense, and it certainly doesn't try to look elegant in the way luxury cars of the period did. Instead, it looks like a smooth, swollen capsule, almost like someone turned a wing into a road vehicle and then forgot to ask whether people were emotionally ready for that. And to be fair, most people probably were not. Even today, it still looks unusual enough that if you parked it next to a line of modern concept cars, it would not look completely out of place. That alone tells you how far ahead of its time this machine really was. The Schlörwagen was developed by German engineer Karl Schlör, who approached the car not as a stylist, but as an aerodynamicist. His idea was not to make a prettier automobile, or even a faster one in the usual sense. He wanted to explore what would happen if a road vehicle were shaped almost entirely by airflow. As early as 1936, Schlör had already proposed an ultra-low drag body form, and under his supervision at the Aerodynamic Research Institute in Göttingen, scale model tests were carried out. Those early wind tunnel tests produced a drag coefficient as low as 0.113, which was extraordinary. Once the functional full-size vehicle was built, the number rose, as it usually does when theory meets reality. But even then, it remained deeply impressive at about 0.186, and later Volkswagen model studies in the 1970s reportedly confirmed a figure around 0.15 for the concept. In other words, this bizarre pillbug from 1939 was playing aerodynamic games that many mainstream production cars would not catch up to for decades. Underneath that radically streamlined body, however, the mechanical base was much more familiar. The Schlörwagen was built on a modified Mercedes-Benz 170h chassis, one of the relatively few rear-engined passenger car platforms available in Germany at the time. That meant the car used a rear-mounted 1.7-liter inline four-cylinder engine, producing roughly 38 horsepower, connected to the rear wheels through a manual transmission. On paper, that sounds modest, and it was. But that is exactly why the Schlörwagen is so interesting. It didn't rely on raw horsepower to create its performance. It relied on shape. That was Schlör's point from the very beginning. If a vehicle wastes less energy fighting the air, then even a small engine can do more useful work. And the testing proved it. Using the same basic powertrain as the Mercedes 170h, the Schlörwagen reached about 84 miles per hour, roughly 12 miles per hour faster than the standard 170h. Schlör himself even believed the car could reach around 91 miles per hour under favorable conditions. Fuel economy was another place where the car's shape paid off in the real world. Contemporary tests suggested the Schlörwagen used roughly 29.4 miles per gallon, compared with roughly 19.6 to 23.5 miles per gallon for the production Mercedes 170h it was based on. That meant a reduction in fuel consumption of roughly 20 to 40%, depending on the comparison and conditions. For a vehicle developed before World War II, those numbers were extraordinary, and they make the Schlörwagen more than just a visual curiosity. It was one of those rare experimental machines that could actually prove its value with measurable performance. It wasn't merely weird, it was weird and right, which is always a dangerous combination for established industries. Its dimensions also reveal why it felt so different from ordinary cars. The Schlörwagen measured about 14.2 feet in length, stood around 4.9 feet high, and was an unusually broad 6.9 feet wide. That width was not a styling flourish, but a direct consequence of the aerodynamic body, because the wheels had to be enclosed within the body shell. That gave the car its almost cartoonishly swollen appearance from the front and rear, but it also dramatically cleaned up the airflow. Even with an aluminum body, the finished car still ended up roughly 550 pounds heavier than the Mercedes-Benz 170h donor chassis, which shows that radical body shaping did not automatically mean featherweight construction. Even so, the aerodynamic benefit was so significant that the extra mass did not stop the car from outperforming the donor in both speed and economy. From the outside, the Schlörwagen looked as if someone had taken a raindrop, flattened it slightly, and decided to put people inside it. The wheels disappeared into the body, the underside was enclosed, and even the windows were designed to fit the contours rather than interrupt them. The entire vehicle was closer to a fuselage than to a conventional car, and that was not an accident. Later commentary on the car described it as essentially a wing on wheels, and that phrase is actually pretty accurate. The whole machine was a demonstration of what happens when aerodynamic theory is allowed to dominate every other design instinct. Most car companies would have compromised somewhere for tradition, appearance, or manufacturability. Schlör more or less refused, and that refusal is the reason the car still feels so radical. Of course, the Schlörwagen was not perfect, and the very thing that made it extraordinary also made it difficult. Its shape and weight distribution, combined with the rear engine layout inherited from the 170h, made it vulnerable to crosswinds and contributed to less than ideal driving safety. It was aerodynamically brilliant, but not necessarily confidence-inspiring in all conditions. That is often the hidden cost of optimization. When you pursue one engineering ideal very aggressively, you sometimes create new problems elsewhere. The Schlörwagen was a masterclass in aerodynamic efficiency, but it also reminded everyone that a real-world automobile has to do more than cheat the wind. It has to be stable, intuitive, easy to place on the road, and acceptable to ordinary drivers who do not want every trip to feel like a physics demonstration. Inside, the car was surprisingly spacious for something that looked so tightly packaged from the outside. The wide body allowed for a roomy passenger compartment, and that was one of the hidden advantages of the design. Aerodynamics had not come at the expense of interior volume. If anything, the body's unusual width created the opposite effect. This is one of those details people tend to forget when they only look at the exterior photos and laugh at the shape. Yes, it looked strange, but it also packaged people effectively, which matters. A design that is only efficient in a wind tunnel is a curiosity. A design that is efficient and roomy starts to become a serious threat to convention. Now, about that famous photo with the giant propeller at the rear. This is exactly the kind of image that creates confusion, because at first glance, it looks as though the Schlörwagen was somehow converted into a propeller-driven car, like a German cousin of the Layat Helica after a particularly bad decision. But that is not what happened. The rear propeller seen in period photographs was not part of the normal vehicle design. Instead, it was part of a special test setup. During wartime experiments, engineers reportedly mounted a Russian M11 aircraft engine rated at about 135 horsepower with a propeller behind the car for testing at Göttingen. In other words, the propeller was not there because the Schlörwagen normally drove that way. It was there as part of a separate aerodynamic and propulsion experiment. So, if you use those photos in your video, the safest way to explain them is to say that the propeller setup was a later test configuration and not the standard powertrain of the car. Otherwise, people will assume the Schlörwagen was some kind of road-going airplane from the start, which is understandable but not quite accurate. Publicly, the Schlörwagen was shown at the 1939 Berlin Motor Show, where it immediately became one of those vehicles that people could not stop looking at, even if they weren't sure whether they admired it. It picked up nicknames like the Göttingen Egg and Pillbug, which tells you two things at once. First, that people recognized how unusual it was, and second, that they were not entirely comfortable with it. This happens all the time with designs that arrive too early. At first, people laugh, then later they quietly copy the good ideas once the shock wears off. And if that sounds familiar, it is because automotive history is full of exactly this pattern. The war, of course, ended any realistic chance the Schlörwagen had of influencing production in its own time. The prototype survived into the war years and was reportedly stored at Göttingen, where parts such as the seats and steering wheel were removed. After the war, Karl Schlör tried repeatedly to recover it from the British military authorities, but in August 1948, the car disappeared from storage and was presumably dismantled or stolen. In practical terms, the original vehicle was lost forever. That disappearance adds a strange, almost ghostly quality to the Schlörwagen's history. It was real, it worked, it proved its point, and then it vanished, leaving behind photographs, measurements, stories, and the uncomfortable reminder that a truly efficient future had briefly appeared and then slipped away. What keeps the Schlörwagen relevant today is not just that it looked unusual or that it set impressive aerodynamic numbers, but that it demonstrated something larger. It showed, in a brutally clear way, how much mainstream automotive design had been leaving on the table. It proved that efficiency, speed, and even cabin space could all improve when you stopped treating the car's shape as decorative and started treating it as an engineering problem. Modern designers, of course, must balance far more variables than Schlör faced, including crash protection, packaging, visibility, manufacturing cost, and cooling requirements. That is one reason modern cars do not look exactly like the Schlörwagen. But the fact that they still chase lower drag coefficients using smoother underbodies, hidden airflow management, and more integrated shapes tells you that Schlör was not wrong. He was just too early, and possibly too honest. In the end, the Schlörwagen matters because it was not a fantasy sketch, not a studio mock-up, and not a gimmick. It was a functioning car that tested better than the conventional machine beneath it, and it did so by taking aerodynamic logic seriously. It looked odd because real efficiency often does. Nature is full of shapes that work brilliantly without caring whether anyone thinks they are pretty. The Schlörwagen belongs to that same category. It is one of those rare machines that forces you to reconsider what a normal car should even be. And if you enjoy rare, unconventional, and genuinely ahead-of-their-time vehicles like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel because there are many more fascinating machines and forgotten ideas still waiting ahead.